On overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Leith, good morning. Thank you for your time as always.
G'day, Mike. Thanks for having me again.
Premier Chris Minns, he seems to be providing a wonderful example of reactive management, doesn't he? I thought that then, but I'm saying something different now.
Yeah, that's right, mate. It's a good old political flip-flop.
Yep.
Is taking place right in front of our eyes. It's been a very interesting couple of weeks, actually. So, as your listeners would be aware, New South Wales has been completely dudded on the goods and services tax. So last week, it was revealed that New South Wales will lose $188 million in GST funding next financial year, so it's 2024-25, whereas Victoria will gain $3.8 billion, which is just, stupid, really. It's rewarding incompetence in Victoria.
Indeed. And
the strange thing about it is, so Chris Minns has actually, hit back really hard, saying that, look, New South Wales is taking 37% of Australia's net overseas migrants. We took 176,000 last financial year, which is 20,000 more than Victoria. Yet we're expected to do it with a decreasing share of Commonwealth spending. And what he basically pointed out was that the federal government's flooding mostly Sydney, New South Wales, but Sydney, let's face it, with all these extra people. And the federal government collects most of the tax revenues from that through the personal income tax system, the corporate tax system, etc. And yet it's leaving New South Wales having to pick up the tab for, the extra schools that need for the kids, extra hospital places, all the government services, public housing, all that sort of stuff. And basically it says that New South Wales has been asked to do more with less. And, the Commonwealth government sets the immigration policy. It gets gains, but New South Wales is suffering the consequences. And he basically said straight out, we don't control immigration, the federal government does, but he basically inferred that, yes, the federal government needs to step up and start paying. And this has been repeated. Former Premier Dominic Perrottet said similar about a month ago when he addressed the Property Council. He called it a lazy immigration and a Ponzi scheme, and says there's not enough houses being constructed for people who aren't here yet, let alone Australians, and that the federal government should be providing more infrastructure investment to the states, and that he's very concerned about his children being able to buy a house. And former Premier, from a long way back, Bob Carr, said the same on Sky News last week, saying that the federal government is basically fire hosing in immigration, not just New South Wales, but also Victoria and, Queensland, etc. And that basically the states have been left high and dry, being stuck with, degrading infrastructure they can't afford to provide for all these extra people and all that. So I'm all for it here, I've got to say, Mike, because this is a debate that Australia needs to have. And, this whole GST fiasco has basically sort of kicked it off, which I think is good.
Ancient Oriental saying, look not at what a man says, but what he does. You could view it as a first step that Minns has shown this turnaround. But what's he going to do about it?
Well, yeah, and the reason why we call it a turnaround and a flip-flop is that last September, I didn't mention this up front, last September, Chris Minns actually supported the federal government's record immigration.
Yep.
So he actually said, I quote, we're supportive of the Commonwealth government's decision to lift immigration in New South Wales to record levels. Like the last three words I added, but that was made in September, so he was all for it, and so was Dominic Perrottet. Like you might remember back in 2021 was when Perrottet took over as Premier from Gladys. He was pushing for a, quote, explosive surge of 2 million migrants into Australia over 5 years to catch up for COVID. And so he did the same thing, but then obviously, now he's no longer in government and he realises that was a mistake. So
I think the key phrase there might have been no longer in government. We have seen that before with other circumstances and other politicians, have we not?
Yes, and we do. Yeah, that's right, mate. And look, what are they going to do about it? Personally, the way I think you could fix a lot of this problem with the big migration and also this vertical fiscal imbalance we've got, where the Commonwealth collects 80% of the revenue, the states and local governments collect 20%, and they're always left overburdened by this stuff. And there's this, it's poor incentives. So the federal government has the incentive to keep ramping up immigration because he gets the benefits, and then all the costs are deferred onto other people, like the states, and then to us as residents. So the infrastructure never keeps up. We've got forced to live in smaller housing and all the livability stuff we talk about every week. a good solution to this would be to basically for all the states to get together and demand the federal government pay the states $50,000 per new resident that resides in their states, whether it's from immigration or birth. And then what that would effectively do is it would force the Australian Treasury to factor the cost of immigration alongside the benefits. So basically it would say, okay, we bring in 100,000 more migrants, we get X number of, personal income tax receipts, it grows the economy overall, get more company tax receipts. But hang on, now there's actually costs involved. Because at the moment, they're only seeing the benefits and they don't worry about the costs because it's not on their balance sheet. And that's why we've got this problem of excessive immigration. And then you've got all the states drowning in debt. We never get the infrastructure built and we all go backwards. And then states end up selling off everything because they can't afford to keep building stuff. So they sell everything off to then build more and then they privatise everything. Then you're a city society and now drowning in toll roads.
And everybody pays a lot more for the same at best. So with this, though, if all the states got together, yes, absolutely, I see the sense of it. But are the feds being a bit divide and conquer cunning there by providing WA with a better deal?
Yeah, so I'm talking about in excess of the GST. So the GST is actually, and this is the other problem with the GST. The GST is a shrinking revenue base. So what that means is the states are effectively fighting over a shrinking pie. Now, obviously the amount goes up every year, but in a relative sense, the amount of tax taken from GST versus all other taxes and the size of the economy is shrinking. And the reason for that is that the biggest areas of household expenditure, so we're talking about, spending on healthcare, on fresh food, on education, etc. Those areas are not included in the GST. So what it means is that the GST doesn't keep up with household spending and doesn't keep up with the economy in general. So effectively, the state's slice of the pie in revenue from GST is shrinking every year, and they fight over that pie vigorously. Meanwhile, the fastest growing revenue source is actually with the federal government with personal income taxes. So that rises not just with population growth, but also with bracket creep. So again, this is a situation where the feds, by ramping up immigration, get way more revenue and they love it. But then the states are left paying for that. And they're one area where they actually do get some distribution from the federal government through the GST is shrinking overall. And then we have all the Barneys within that, whereby, say, Victoria gets 3.8 billion, New South Wales gets stripped, Western Australia gets more than it probably should, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a distributional stuff within the GST, but then there's also the problem in the overall system in that the GST is a shrinking revenue base. Yeah. And we need a better system whereby the states can get a bigger share of the revenue pie. And so in addition to GST, the feds should basically just be paying $50,000 per new resident to pay for their infrastructure, their services, all that sort of stuff, and to share the benefits of their tax revenue that they receive through immigration, et cetera.
So as to changing this, you say, and it seems perfectly logical, that if the states got together and said to the feds, we're not going to stand for this anymore, that would be good. But it's always, it seems, reactive management. They're not going to do that until, I beg your pardon?
Yeah, also divide and conquer, like you said. So the feds will just end up bribing off one state to play off against the other, and then they'll break rank, et cetera. But I think all we need is the three major states. If you got, New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland on a sort of unity ticket on this and push it hard, we might get some kind of, maybe I'm being too hopeful, but this is the sort of thing we need done to fix this problem.
Oh, no, I think what you're proposing makes absolute sense. What I'm saying, though, is will they do it until their political careers are actually about to go off the cliff? And I guess that would take a promise from the opposition to go along the lines you're suggesting and explaining comprehensively to the electorate that it would be in their interest.
Yeah, and there is always a problem there. So, for example, last week we saw the Queensland Liberal Party opposition leader, who's favoured to win the upcoming state election in Queensland, basically come out and blame the Queensland government for not providing enough infrastructure and housing, et cetera, to keep up with the population explosion. So, that was a completely ridiculous argument because it's not the state government's fault, it's the federal government's fault for polling the people in. But of course, he was playing politics.
It suits his short-term aims, yeah.
That's it, yeah. So it's easy to make the state government look incompetent because it hasn't provided enough of all its stuff. But the fact of the matter is, if he was in government, he would have done the same because they're starved of money. And as long as you have people doing that sort of stuff, being bad actors and not being honest, you're going to always have it's going to be hard to get sort of unity in these sorts of things. But that's the sort of reform we do need.
Oh,
and
I agree.
We need the federal treasury to basically not just see immigration as a benefit. It needs to also wear some of the costs. And only when they do that will they fix the system, because not only will they run a lower intake, they'll run a higher quality intake, because suddenly they'll be going, well, hang on, if we're going to bring people in, we need to make sure that they're top notch and they pay more income tax than they do currently, rather than just, taking marginal migrants in a lot of cases who don't add that much tax revenue, but for the federal government, it's still positive because they're not paying the cost side of it.
That's right. So it's probably too much to ask for them to get the big picture, but at least they could get a bigger picture and, take responsibility for the consequences of their actions. Probably a big ask, but could happen, Leith. I like to think it's a possibility, as you say. Listen, thanks very much for that. Talk next week.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Speak to you next time.
Leith Van Onselen, and Leith is Chief Economist at the MB Fund and MB Super co-founder of Macro Business.